Now that everything is set up in order to work with Python, let's run our very first program. Let's see what happens when we run this line of code, print hello future Python programmer. After running this line of code, you see that Python returned a sentence saying hello future Python programmer, the exact same sentence that we saw on the line that we just wrote. Let's take a closer look at the print function that we just ran. The line that we previously wrote consists of the word print, an opening parentheses, double quotes, a line of text saying hello future Python programmer, double quotes again, and closing parentheses. Combining all these characters together made it possible for Python to understand that we wanted to print the line hello future Python programmer. But how was it able to do that? The word print here is a function name. A function is part of our code that we can use in order to cause some effect or evaluate a value. In this case, we use the print function to print the line hello future Python programmer to the terminal. Some functions come from Python itself. In this case, we never told Python that it should print something to the console when we used the print function. It already knew this, since it's a built-in function. Functions can also come from one or more of Python's modules. Some modules come with Python, and others require some installation. How modules can be installed will be covered later. Lastly, we can also write our own functions in our programs to make our code simpler, clearer, and just more elegant. Let's take a look again at the anatomy of the function that we just saw. Now that we know what the word print is for, what about the other values? This is another component of functions, namely arguments. We can pass arguments to a function by placing them between parentheses. In this case, we passed the line hello future Python programmer as an argument to the print function. The line is delimited with quotes, and a value between quotes is called a string. The quotes cut out a part of the code and assign a different meaning to it. The quotes tell Python that the text between them is not code and shouldn't get executed. Python should just take it as it is. If we passed another string to the print function, Python will print that string instead. Now, let's see what steps Python takes in order to execute a function. First, Python checks if the name of the function is legal. If it's a built-in function, it browses the internals in order to find an existing function with that name. If that fails, the execution is aborted. Then, Python checks if the function's requirements for the number of arguments allows you to invoke the function in the way that you just did. When the arguments have been validated, Python leaves your code for a moment and jumps into the code of the function that you want to invoke. In this case, the internal print function gets executed and uses the value that we passed as an argument to the function, the string hello future Python programmer. The function is executed and, in this case, prints the line that we passed to it as an argument. Finally, Python returns back to your code and it resumes the execution of the code block. Since the print function is an extremely important function when working with Python, let's look at all the possibilities that this function provides. If we want to print multiple lines at once, we can do so by invoking multiple print functions, each on their own line. An important thing to keep in mind is that there cannot be more than one instruction on a line in Python. If you want to print a longer sentence that should be separated with new lines, you can do so with a newline character. The N stands for newline, and the backslash lets Python know that the next character after the backslash has a special meaning. This prints the sentence with a newline. So far, we've only passed one argument to the print function. But what happens if we pass multiple arguments instead, each separated by commas? Python prints the exact same line as it did when we just passed it as one string. When we pass multiple arguments to the print function, Python combines the arguments together and prints them all on one line. In order to get a little more control over the output, Python allows you to pass special arguments to the print function, namely keyword arguments. One keyword argument is the end argument. The keyword argument end determines the characters that the print function sends to the output once it reaches the end of its positional arguments. Previously, we saw that invoking the print function on 2 lines meant that their output was also printed on 2 lines. This happens since the newline character is the default value that Python adds once it reaches the end of its positional arguments. With this end keyword that consists of just an empty string, we told Python to use an empty string instead of a newline. This means that both lines were printed on the same line. You can pass whatever value you want to use at the end of the hello output. Another keyword argument is sep. This keyword allows you to control how Python separates the outputted arguments, which is just a space by default. Combining the sep and end keyword arguments gives you full control over the print function's output. In this case, we're separating the arguments in the first line by an exclamation mark and a space. We're ending the output with a heart emoji and a new line. The second line is separated by a comma and a space, and ended with a smiley emoji. So let's summarize everything that we just learned about the print function. Print is a built-in function that allows you to print values to the console. Since it's a built-in function, we always have access to the function without having to import it or specify it anywhere. And since it's a function, we can call it by invoking it with parentheses. In between these parentheses, we can pass the values that we want the print function to output to the console. We also learned that the backslash is a special character in Python that we can use in order to tell Python that the next character is a special character. We saw this with the newline character that is specified by a backslash followed by an n for newline. Then we saw that we had full control over the output with the keyword arguments such as sep and end. That's it for this lecture. Head over to the labs and start practicing what you've just learned.